Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with the least ideal Shostakovich Symphony cycle by mostly major conductors. I mean, if I wanted to do all major conductors, I would have had to come up with 15 of them who did Shostakovich cycles regularly or Shostakovich performances, and that's a little tough. So they're mostly major and a few less major, but they all suck equally. No, this is actually really an interesting exercise, finding a complete cycle of not very good performances. They don't have to be atrocious. Some of them are, but they just have to be not great or the weakest part of a larger cycle or something you just wouldn't want to own normally. And wow, 15 fun-filled symphonies and quite mediocre performances. I think this is an interesting exercise. I really do, because the Shostakovich discography has exploded, over the past couple of decades or so. Complete symphony cycles were really few and far between. I mean, there was Kondrashin, and that was it. And then sort of Haitink did one, and there just wasn't much. And now, yeesh, people have done multiple symphony cycles. Some of them are part multiple symphony cycles. It's unreal. It really is. It shows us so much about what's happened to the classical record industry and what's going on. What these people think that they're trying to sell to this small group of people that's interested in A, classical music, B, 20th century classical music, C, gut-wrenching 20th century classical music. The audience gets smaller and smaller and smaller until it's a singularity, basically. So let's go through it, shall we? Symphony number 1. John Storgards of the BBC Philharmonic on Chandos, which I just covered. I figured since it was fresh in my mind and freshly uninteresting, I might as well start there. Storgards Shostakovich has been uniformly lousy. I mean, he just is not a Shostakovich guy. And he doesn't have an orchestra that's got that sort of guts and power. And I mean, maybe they can. Maybe they have it, because I've heard them give stunning performances of all kinds of music, but not under Storgards. So go figure. We'll come back to Chandos and Shostakovich in a minute, because they have not been all that lucky. They were partially lucky. They had Järvi originally with Scottish National, which was fabulous, but he jumped ship to Deutsche Grammophon and left the conclusion of his Shostakovich cycle to Deutsche Grammophon in Gothenburg. More of which now. Symphony number 2. Look at that. Niemi Järvi with the Gothenburg Symphony Orchestra on DG. Järvi's Gothenburg recordings of Shostakovich weren't nearly as good as his Chandos recordings with Scottish National, but partly it was a function of the orchestra and the sonics and Järvi himself and the works. Because Symphony number 2, it's Symphony number 2. No one really likes it, but it has a certain avant-garde allure. And if you're going to do it, it's got a factory whistle with screaming choirs about, marching workers carrying cement, and it's just a joy. If you're going to do it, then you have to have 100% conviction and a little bit of nuttiness. And Järvi, he could, you would think, but for some reason, the temperature in his Gothenburg Shostakovich recordings is just a hair lower. I mean, his late symphonies are better because they have more of that sort of solar plexus emotionalism. He did, what was it, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 in Gothenburg, and some of those are okay. But 2 and 3, no, just a snooze. And speaking of snoozes, number 3, Mark Wigglesworth with the Netherlands Radio Philharmonic on BIS. His Shostakovich cycle is really, really good, and some of it is stupendous. But his 3rd symphony, well, it's generally regarded, along with the 12th, as like one of the 2 or 3 weakest of all the symphonies. It can be put across with a certain socialist, realist, hair-raising vulgarity that can be fun, actually. I mean, it really can be. It's kind of outlandish and crazy, but you have to do that. And the orchestra is just not up for it. The trumpets don't blare, the brass, aren't brassy, and it's a disappointment within the context of Wigglesworth's cycle as a whole, because it's a very, very good cycle. So, but I got to mention it. That's the point. Finding the weaknesses. probing for things that are less than superior. Well, this is less than superior. Symphony number 4. Oh my. Mikhail Pletnev. Pletnev with the Russian National Orchestra on PentaTone. Oh, it was released with the 10th. The 2 worst Shostakovich performances you've ever heard in your life. They are sluggish. They are incredibly weak-kneed. It's incredible. It's astonishing just how not Russian these performances sound. You know, there's no vitality, no ruggedness, no screaming excitement, no outlandish emotionalism. They're all just cold, dull, boring slogs. And with the 4th Symphony, I mean, it has so many opportunities for like complete insanity to break out, and it never does. It's dreadful, absolutely dreadful. And speaking of dreadful, holy mackerel, Symphony number 5, Roman Kofman with the Beethoven Orchestra Bonn. On MD and G. This is a cycle. Believe it or not, they did a cycle. Now, the Beethoven Orchestra of Bonn is the worst Russian orchestra that ever played an instrument. I have never heard them do anything, and I've heard them. The most awful performance of a Russian symphony I think I ever heard in my life was when Dennis Russell Davies took them on tour and did Prokofiev's 6th at Carnegie Hall. I mean, what these people were doing playing that music, I have no idea. It was beyond unidiomatic. And so are these Shostakovich performances. And, you know, recorded in resplendent MD&G surround, whatever it was, proprietary audiophile, techno glitz sonics. I mean, gosh, they're awful. They are so feeble. That's the word. Flebile in Italian. Feeble. Absolutely gutless performances. And one thing Shostakovich can never, ever, ever, ever be is gutless. I mean, it's just, you can't. So, there's that, and that's just dreadful. Then we've got Gergiev doing number 6 with Mariinsky. Oh my God. Now, Gergiev made multiple recordings of these pieces, some of them, and his Mariinsky recording is positively the worst that he ever did. I don't know, it's terrible. The orchestra's lousy. It's a live recording. The sonics are lousy. The first movement is dull as ditch water. The last 2 he just flashes through without a single brain cell engaging with the music. It's just terrible. Absolutely terrible. Then there's number 7. Oh, the Leningrad. You know, I didn't put in the word Leningrad here. I should, I suppose, just so we all remember what it's called. Leningrad. There. This is my list here. Leningrad. Where is the grad? There we go. Leningrad. So who screws that one up? Well, a bunch of people have screwed that one up. But the most shocking was Leonard Bernstein's first recording with the New York Philharmonic, because his second one with Chicago was like the reference recording for the work. He made amends. But initially, he was not convinced by the symphony, and so he cut the first movement. And that was not a nice thing to do. It certainly was not. Now, I've seen cut performances. Temirkanov, particularly, when he does it live, chops it down to about, well, it takes about 20 minutes or so of music. And I was sort of shocked by that, but when he recorded it live, you know, he did the whole thing. He usually does things complete on records and in concert because we all want to go to the bathroom. He makes them shorter. But Bernstein cut it, and I was, you know, it was the first one I got. And I couldn't believe my ears. I was just totally horrified. So, you know, is it a bad performance? Well, the parts that he plays, which is most of it, I mean, he only cuts some repetition in the repeat of the march theme in the first movement. But, you know, it's good for the rest of it because he was a wonderful Shostakovich conductor. But no, it's certainly not ideal. Which is our point here. This is Symphony number 8. This was a surprisingly disappointing performance with George Schwarz and the Seattle Symphony on Delos. You know, I would have thought he would have done this stuff quite well. And it's not terrible. Again, it's not like he has no idea how the symphony goes. You know, he's got a good sense of the work, but it's a very tame performance. And tame recordings of the 8th are simply intolerable. That's just not a symphony that you hear in connection with the word tame. So that's a big disappointment. Oh, and number 9. Oh, back to Chandos and their Shostakovich problems. Well, Storgards was definitely a problem. See, they wanted a cycle. And if they could have gotten it all done with Järvi, they would have been in great shape. We would have been praising them to the skies because of what they have already. But didn't work out. And so they switched to Valery Polyanski, who is an absolutely uninteresting, nondescript Russian choral music conductor. Some of his choral music was nice, but he did a huge series of Chandos recordings, not a single one of which is memorable, as far as I can tell. And he started a Shostakovich cycle, and this number 9, how do you blow number 9? Really, how do you make it so completely uninteresting? Well, he's got the Russian State Symphony Orchestra, which is nothing special, and then he's nothing special. And the result is nothing special, unsurprisingly. Really, I couldn't believe it. Symphony number 10, Rostropovich with the London Symphony on Warner. How's that for a shocker? Rostropovich's London Symphony Shostakovich performances were dreary, uniformly dreary. I mean, he remade some of them also for the LSO's own label. They were even drearier. His recordings with the National Symphony Orchestra, his own orchestra in Washington, were usually pretty good, for the most part. I mean, there were also a couple losers there, but basically they were pretty good. But my God, these LSO performances just had no bite to them at all. And Rostropovich, who is, known for his emotionalism and his intensity, it didn't carry over in these LSO recordings, not a bit, which is really a shame. Symphony number 11, the year 1905. Oh my goodness. Well, I've doubled because I could have picked a few others, but there are so many conductors who've done Shostakovich cycles who are weak in the same symphonies, and so I chose Kofman again because it's such a bad Shostakovich cycle. I mean, I could have found somebody else. I definitely could have. But Rostropovich also did a horrible 11th, and he's done it a couple times. I mean, it's really funny how that happens. But oh goodness, his Shostakovich 11th was just as bad as his Shostakovich 5th, and it's just worth pointing out that this is a cycle that really ought to be avoided, I think. I mean, I guess I chickened out on number 11, but it was, rather than find an obscure conductor who did it badly, I thought it would be more fun to just actually give a double hit to what I still think is probably the most terrible Shostakovich cycle that anyone ever attempted. I don't know if they ever finished it. I sort of gave up halfway through it, but number 12, Ladislav Slovak with the Czecho-Slovak Symphony Orchestra on Naxos. Well, Slovak, this was interesting. Naxos, when they started out, they were doing, these Eastern European orchestras where they paid a flat fee and got control of the recording, and they were unknown artists and lesser orchestras, and some of the stuff they did was great. And Slovak was a really good Shostakovich conductor. He understood the music, he understood how it should go, but he had mediocre recorded sound and a really second-rate orchestra. And the 12th, it can, High Tink in the Concertgebouw showed us how thrilling it can be when it's done with 100% conviction by a great orchestra that just rams it home. But they just weren't able to do that. I mean, we're talking like not horrible, but less than ideal. The sonics aren't great. The orchestra is seedy. And because it's not a great symphony, even if you love it, and I know some of you do, it's still not a great symphony. It can sound very easily to be cheaper and trashier and worse than it is when everything goes right. And this is one of those circumstances, and I feel badly about it, but that's the way it is. No one's running around saying, oh, gee, I really need to get Ladislav Slovak's Shostakovich 12. No, we don't. And number 13, oh my goodness, the recent Andres Nelson's Boston Symphony recording for Deutsche Grammophon. What a letdown that was. It's just, I mean, flat-footed, and tension's all wrong in different places, and the playing lacks conviction, and the sonics aren't great. It's just nothing is better than second rate in that performance. Nothing at all. It was a big, big disappointment in the context of that Shostakovich cycle, as is Symphony Number 14 in the Haitink cycle. Reason: Fischer-Dieskau and Julia Varady. First of all, Fischer-Dieskau is not a bass. Even as he went through menopause, he did not become a bass. And Julia Varady is a good soprano, but they did the international version where they switch back to doing the poems in all of their original languages, which is a total mistake. It should be sung in Russian. It was written in Russian. The musical lines, the vocal lines go in Russian. They belong in Russian, and it sounds consistent and coherent and fabulous in Russian. It does not sound great when you do Death Entered and Left the Tavern, Smert vishla, I ushla iz taverny. It does not sound better when you do that in Spanish. La muerte entrar en la taberna. I mean, what are they kidding? Please. It's a shallow, lightweight, unidiomatic performance. Period. And last but not least, Kurt Sanderling, who's a wonderful Shostakovich conductor, and who did a fabulous recording of Symphony Number 15 with his own Berlin Symphony for Berlin Classics, the Berlin, triple fecta, whatever it is. He remade the 15th with the Cleveland Orchestra for Arado. He also did a Mahler 9 with them. Oh my God, were they bad. Just bad. I mean, this 15th is endless. I think it's the slowest recording ever. I mean, it may be the slowest recording ever, but the finale is interminable. So is the second movement, that Adagio. I mean, the 15th is tough because it is mostly slow music with some, the quick opening and that 5-minute scherzo. And so it needs to be kept moving, and tension needs to be sustained, and this whole performance just collapses under its own weight. It's a fabulously depressing and dismal conclusion to this least ideal series of Shostakovich Symphony performances by mostly major conductors. So keep on listening, friends. Thanks for joining me. Take care.